The last thing Xander Blake needed that morning was to be trapped in an elevator, especially not with a stranger, and especially not when he was already late to pick up his son. He hit the emergency button again, harder this time. "Come on," he muttered under his breath, pushing his palm against the cold steel wall. "Panicking won't make it move," a calm voice said beside him. He turned. She stood in the corner, arms crossed, heels clicking lightly as she shifted. Her navy blazer looked expensive. Her hair was pulled back into a sleek ponytail, and she was staring at him with a raised brow like she was used to being in control. She didn't look panicked. She looked
bored.
"Easy for you to say," Xander said, running a hand through his messy brown hair. His worn-out hoodie and faded jeans made him feel even more out of place next to her. "I have to pick up my son in 20 minutes.
She tilted her head.
"How old is he?"
5.
"His name's Theo. He's at preschool right now, but if I'm not there at noon, they'll start calling emergency contacts. Which is just my sister." "Who's in Chicago?" Something shifted in her expression. "You're a single dad?" "Yeah," he said, glancing at the floor. "His mom left when he was 2. Haven't heard from her since." There was a pause. Then, softer, "That's rough." He looked back at her. "You don't look like you're late for anything." "I am," she said, pulling out her phone. "But it's fine. They can wait." "Must be nice," he muttered, before realizing how bitter that sounded.
He sighed. I didn't mean that."
She gave a small nod. "It's okay." The elevator groaned again, but stayed still. Xander leaned against the wall, tapping his foot. "This is just great. I was only here to drop off a job application." "What kind of work?" she asked. "Building maintenance. I used to do HVAC repairs. Got laid off last year. Been picking up whatever I can since then, odd jobs, part-time stuff. It's hard with Theo." She studied him quietly for a second. "You always this honest with strangers in elevators?" He shrugged. "I guess I'm too tired to filter today." A beat passed. "I'm Celine," she said finally, extending her hand. "Xander." He shook her hand, surprised by how firm her grip was. "Nice to meet you, I guess." She smiled faintly. "Under the circumstances." They sank into silence for a moment, the only sound being the quiet hum of the emergency light above them. She sat down on the floor and tucked her legs beneath her. "You don't mind sitting on the floor in that outfit?" he asked, flicking his gaze toward her tailored pants. "I've been through worse," she said, then patted the space next to her. He hesitated, then joined her. "So," she said, glancing sideways at him, "what's Theo like?" Xander's face lit up, like it always did when someone asked about his son. "He's the best. He's obsessed with dinosaurs, makes up these wild stories about them. Last week, he told me a T-Rex was hiding in our broom closet." She laughed, actually laughed, and the sound surprised him. "I don't really talk to many people about him," he admitted. "Most interviews, they see single dad and they assume I'll be unreliable. That's their loss." He looked at her again. There was something about her, this quiet confidence, the way she listened without judgment. She didn't make him feel small, even though her clothes screamed money and power. Still, he didn't ask what she did for a living. For all he knew, she was some corporate assistant or finance analyst. And honestly, he didn't care. They talked for another 20 minutes about Theo, about her favorite childhood book, Charlotte's Web, about how awful the elevator music was. And then, with a sudden jolt, the elevator started moving again. "Oh, thank God," Xander said, jumping to his feet. They stepped out into the lobby. He turned to her. "Thanks for not freaking out in there. I know I probably seemed like a mess." "You didn't," she said. "You seem like a good dad." He smiled. "That's not something I hear a lot." She hesitated. "Can I give you my number?" He blinked. "Really?" She nodded. "Just for coffee.
Or
if you want to talk again." Or if Theo wants someone to read Charlotte's Web to him. He stared at her. No one had offered something like that in a long time. Yeah, I'd like that. She pulled a pen from her purse and scribbled a number on a receipt from her bag. Don't lose it. He tucked it carefully into his wallet. I won't. As he turned to leave, she called out, Hey, Xander. He turned around. You're doing great. He couldn't stop grinning all the way to Theo's preschool. 2 days later, he called. Their first coffee turned into dinner. She picked the place some neighborhood bistro with string lights and wood-fired pizza. She wore a simple cream blouse and jeans, and still somehow looked like she belonged on the cover of a magazine. You don't talk much about yourself, he said halfway through their meal. She shrugged. I prefer listening.
Still.
I'm starting to feel like I'm dating a mystery. Her eyes widened slightly. You think this is a date? He choked on his drink. I didn't mean I wasn't trying to assume. Her lips curved. Relax. I'm just teasing. He flushed, laughing to cover his embarrassment. Right.
Okay. Cool.
Totally fine. I own a company, she said, picking up her wine glass. Tech-based logistics. We handle supply chains for large-scale retailers. He blinked. You own the company? She nodded. You're the CEO?
Yeah.
He stared at her for a long second. You're kidding. Nope. Why were you in that building the other day? Investor meeting. One of our partners has offices there. He leaned back.
Wow.
I thought you were maybe an assistant or something. I get that a lot. He was quiet for a moment. That's a lot. If it freaks you out, it doesn't, he said quickly. It just explains why you weren't panicking in the elevator. She laughed. True. He looked down at his hands. I'm not exactly in your league. You think I care about leagues? I have $42 in my bank account right now. I own 5 buildings downtown, she said casually. And I still liked being stuck in an elevator with you. He looked at her, stunned. I like you, Xander. And I like Theo. This isn't about money. He swallowed hard. This is the part where I'm supposed to say something charming, right? Her eyes softened.
No.
Just be honest. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. I think I'm falling for you, and it scares the hell out of me. She smiled. Good. Because I think I'm falling for you too. And just like that, everything changed. Theo's little hand tightened in Xander's as they stepped into the glass-walled lobby of the Children's Science Museum. This place is huge, Theo whispered, his blue backpack bouncing against his back with each step. It is, Xander said, taking in the marble floors and the robotic dinosaur skeleton that moved its head above the entrance. And it's all yours for the day. Theo blinked up at him. Really? Courtesy of Celine. Xander still couldn't fully wrap his mind around it. The night before, she'd casually asked if Theo liked science. When he said yes, she made a single phone call. Within 10 minutes, the museum had agreed to host a private tour for just the two of them. And she hadn't even planned to come along. But she was already waiting inside, wearing a long beige coat over a dark red sweater, talking to a staff member who looked like he'd never seen someone so important in his life. Theo whispered, Is she a princess? Xander chuckled. Something like that. Celine turned as they approached, and her face lit up not with the polite warmth she used in public, but with something real and unguarded. Hey, Theo, she said, crouching down. I heard you like dinosaurs. Theo looked stunned for a second, then nodded solemnly. They're my favorite, especially the ones with horns. The Triceratops, she said. Excellent choice. Do you know about the Ankylosaurus? He asked, eyes wide. I do, she said. But you'll have to tell me your favorite fact about it. Deal?
Taugarin. Deal.
Xander folded his arms, watching them. Celine wasn't trying too hard, and she wasn't faking interest. She talked to Theo like he mattered. Like he wasn't just a kid, but a person worth knowing. He hadn't seen that in anyone
Well,
since before Theo's mother walked out. The tour guide led them through the exhibits, pausing to let Theo climb into the cockpit of a flight simulator and letting him push every brightly lit button on the interactive wall displays. Celine asked questions too, but she always gave Theo the space to answer first. When they reached the fossil lab, she leaned over to Xander and whispered, "He's brilliant." He nodded, his throat tight. After 2 hours, they ended up on the rooftop garden, where a catered picnic had been set up under a white canopy. A server offered Theo a plate of mini dinosaur-shaped sandwiches. Celine sat across from Xander, sipping sparkling water from a crystal glass. "You didn't have to do all this," he said quietly. "I know," she said, "but I wanted to." He didn't ask how much it cost. He didn't want to know. "How do you do it?" he asked. "All this. The company, the money, the meetings. And still make time for strangers and elevators." "I don't make time for strangers," she said. "I make time for people who matter." He looked away, overwhelmed. "I want you to understand something," she added, lowering her glass. "You don't owe me anything. I know that. But I also know how hard it is to accept help when you're used to being the one who holds everything together." His jaw tightened. "I'm not proud of where I am right now." "I'm not asking you to be proud," she said. "I'm asking you to be honest." He looked up at her.
I'm scared.
"Of me? Of how easy it is to want this?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached across the table and touched his hand, her fingers warm. "You've been carrying the weight of 2 people for half a decade. Let someone carry part of it with you." Theo interrupted them by running over with a fistful of coloring pages and a juice box. "Look what I made." Celine smiled and pulled him into her lap without hesitation. "You're an artist too? Is there anything you can't do?" Xander watched them, his son giggling in her arms, her expression soft and open, and something inside him cracked. He hadn't believed in second chances. Not really. Not after everything. But now, sitting in the sun with the woman he'd met by accident and the boy who owned his heart, he couldn't help but wonder if fate had finally decided to give him one. That night, after he tucked Theo into bed, Xander walked out onto the fire escape of their small apartment, phone in hand. He didn't call her.
He didn't need to.
She was already there in his thoughts. He opened a message thread and stared at the blank screen, then deleted it. Instead, the next morning he went to her. Her office was on the top floor of a high-rise in Midtown. He'd never been in a place like it: polished marble, silent elevators, glass walls that looked out over the entire city. He stepped off the elevator and approached the front desk. "I'm here to see Celine Marchand," he said. The receptionist looked up. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," he said. "But she'll see me." There was a pause. Then the woman picked up the phone, murmured something, and nodded toward the hallway. She said, "Go in." He found her sitting behind a sleek black desk, framed by floor-to-ceiling windows. She stood when she saw him, her expression unreadable. "You came. You invited me. I wasn't sure you'd take me seriously." "I wasn't sure either," he said, stepping closer. "But I realized something." "What's that?" "I've been surviving for so long, I forgot what it felt like to actually live." She tilted her head. And I don't want to keep surviving. Not if living means this." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn index card. On it were Theo's crayon drawings, one of a stick-figure family, the other of a dinosaur wearing a crown. "He made this last night," Xander said. "Told me it was me, him, and the lady who makes the world better." Celine's lips parted. "I don't have much," he continued, "but I have everything that matters. And I want to share it, if you'll let me." She walked around the desk and stopped in front of him. "You're not afraid anymore?" "I'm still afraid," he said. "But I think the scariest thing would be walking away." She nodded slowly, then leaned in and kissed him soft, sure, and full of something deeper than hope. When they broke apart, she whispered, "Then don't walk away."
He didn't.
From that day on, their lives began to weave together not in grand declarations or sweeping changes, but in quiet, steady threads. She showed up to Theo's school play, clapping louder than anyone. He fixed the leaky pipes in her penthouse kitchen without being asked. She invited him to a charity gala, and he showed up in a suit that didn't quite fit, but with a dignity that made her chest ache. They didn't talk about the future yet, but it was there in the dinners they cooked together, in the bedtime stories they traded off reading, in the way she looked at him like he was already home. One evening, as they sat on her balcony watching the skyline flicker, she turned to him. "Have you ever thought about what you'd do if you weren't worried about money?" He hesitated.
Yeah.
"I'd open my own repair company. Something small. Local. Just honest work done right." She nodded slowly. "Then let's do it." He blinked. "What?" "You start the company. I'll invest." "Celine, I'm not giving you anything," she said. "I'm believing in you. That's different." He stared at her, stunned. "You're brilliant, Xander. And I want the world to see it." He looked down at her hand in his, then up at the stars. Maybe, just maybe, this was the life he was always meant to have. The first time Xander stepped into the new storefront, it was nothing but dust, exposed beams, and a broken ceiling fan that spun lazily, like it was clinging to life. The space was tucked between a bakery and a dry cleaner, with an old for lease sign still taped inside the front window. The air smelled like forgotten dreams and leftover plaster. Celine stood beside him in a perfectly tailored camel coat, arms crossed as she examined the cracked tiles beneath their feet. "It's got potential," she said. Xander gave a low whistle. "It's got something, all right. Maybe tetanus." She looked over at him. "You don't like it?" "I didn't say that," he said, walking toward the back room. He pushed open a hollow core door and peeked inside. "There's enough space for storage. Maybe even an office if I knock out that wall." "I figured you'd want to build it your way." She followed him in, heels clicking softly against the uneven floor. "You pick the name, the layout, the tools. I'll handle the paperwork." He turned around, leaning his shoulder against the wall. "You really trust me with all of that?" "I wouldn't have signed the lease if I didn't." He rubbed the back of his neck. "It's a lot to take in." She smiled faintly, but it wasn't the same polished expression she wore at boardrooms or galas. This one was quieter, more personal. Sometimes the only way forward is to leap. Xander looked around the space again, trying to see past the grime and the peeling walls. He didn't see decay anymore. He saw a counter where Theo could do homework after school. He saw custom shelves for parts and tools. He saw the place where his life might finally start to feel like his again. "Okay," he said. "Let's leap." Over the next several weeks, the shop came alive. Xander spent his days tearing down sheetrock, rewiring fixtures and sanding floorboards, with Theo often trailing behind him in a tiny hard hat Celine had ordered online. Every evening, they returned home covered in sawdust and paint, but somehow lighter than they'd ever been. Celine didn't hover. She brought coffee when he forgot to eat, scheduled inspections with the city, and surprised him with a professional logo design that somehow captured everything he'd wanted without him saying a word. When he asked how she knew, she just said, "I listen."
He could have kissed her then.
But instead, he reached for her hand and held it like he was afraid it might disappear. The day of the grand opening arrived on a sunny Saturday in early spring. The freshly painted sign above the door read "True Fix" in bold slate blue letters, with a simple tagline underneath. Built right. Done right. It was more than a business. It was a promise. Theo wore a button-up shirt and clip-on tie, bouncing on the balls of his feet as he handed out flyers to curious passers-by. Every time someone walked in, he announced them like royalty. "Welcome to my dad's shop." Xander stood behind the counter, wiping his palms on his jeans. He hadn't expected such a crowd. Celine had quietly arranged for a local newspaper to run a human interest piece on the single dad who turned an elevator mishap into a business launch. People showed up. Neighbors. Former clients. Even the museum guide from their rooftop picnic with a framed photo of Theo beside a fossil. But none of it compared to the moment he saw Celine walk in, wearing a simple navy blouse and slacks, no entourage, no press, just her. "You did it," she said, stepping close.
"We did it," he replied.
"I just opened the door. You built everything inside. I wouldn't have dared to try if not for you." She looked around, taking in the handmade wooden display shelves, the polished floor, the glossy counter with its neat row of business cards. "It's beautiful," she said. He leaned in, voice low. "So are you." She didn't look away. "Come to the gala with me." He blinked. "What?" "My company's 10th anniversary event. It's black tie, high profile, and I hate every second of it unless you're there." He hesitated. "Will I fit in?" "You'll stand out. For all the right reasons." He laughed, nervous. "Theo can stay with my assistant. She watches her nephews every weekend." "I already asked." "You planned this." "I hoped." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded.
"Okay.
I'll go." The gala was held in the ballroom of a 5-star hotel, with gold leaf ceilings and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline. A string quartet played near the marble staircase. Xander had never seen so many tuxedos in one room. He wore one too. Celine had it tailored for him. He tried to protest, but she cut him off with a single look. When he stepped out of the dressing room that afternoon, Theo had clapped like it was opening night on Broadway. Celine met him at the entrance, radiant in a midnight blue gown that shimmered under the chandeliers. She took his arm without hesitation, like he belonged there beside her. People stared. Whispers floated through the air. "Is that him? That's the guy from the story. She brought him here?" Xander felt the pressure like a weight on his chest. But Celine didn't flinch. She introduced him to board members, industry leaders, and international clients, not as a novelty, but as someone she respected. By the time the speeches began, he'd stopped checking how many eyes were on him. He only watched her. She took the stage last. 10 years ago, she said, I started this company with a single desk and a borrowed laptop. I had no investors, no safety net, and no name anyone recognized. What I had was grit and a vision for how things could be better. Xander saw something flicker in her eyes. Not nerves. Something deeper. I've built contracts across continents. I've signed deals worth millions. But the most important decision I've made in those 10 years wasn't about profit or expansion. It was about believing in someone who reminded me what all this success is for.
She paused.
His name is Xander Blake. And he's here tonight. The crowd turned. Xander felt his heart hammer against his ribs. He reminded me that building something real isn't just about scale. It's about heart, integrity, and doing right by the people who depend on you. Her gaze locked with his. Thank you, Xander, for reminding me that the best things we build have nothing to do with money. Applause erupted. He stood there, stunned, as she descended the steps and walked straight to him. You didn't have to say all that, he said hoarsely. I wanted to. He leaned in. You make it hard not to fall in love with you. She didn't laugh. She didn't look away. Then don't fight it. I'm not, he said. Not anymore. They didn't kiss. Not there. Not yet. But her hand in his told him everything he needed to know. Later that night, when they returned to her penthouse with Theo already asleep in the guest room, Xander stood by the window, looking out at the city that had once felt so far out of reach. Celine came up behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist. I'm proud of you, she whispered. He turned in her arms. You know what I'm proud of? What? That I didn't let fear keep me from riding that damn elevator. She laughed softly, her head resting against his chest. I was never afraid of falling, he said. I was afraid of landing somewhere I didn't belong. And now, he kissed the top of her head. Now I know exactly where I belong. Celine found Xander on the back patio of their new home, if it could still be called new after 5 months of slowly settling in. The backyard stretched into a quiet line of trees where Theo had built a dino fortress out of old shipping crates and rope. Evening light filtered through the branches, casting a soft amber glow over the lawn. Xander stood barefoot on the stone, a paintbrush in one hand and a half-finished wooden bench in front of him. He'd insisted on building it himself, even though she'd offered to commission a custom 1 week ago. Now, watching him wipe sweat from his brow and squint at the uneven leg he was sanding, she understood why he hadn't accepted the offer. You know, she said, stepping down the patio steps, you could just call it abstract and leave it. He looked over his shoulder. I thought you were on a call. It ended early. The board signed off. He set the brush on the work table. On the expansion? On the restructuring. That's the one where you fire half your VPs and replace them with younger, less expensive talent. She pulled her hair into a loose knot. That's the one where I remove people who stopped listening 2 years ago and promote the ones who've been quietly holding the company together. Age has nothing to do with it. He leaned against the table, crossing his arms. You really did it. She raised an eyebrow. Did you doubt me? Not once. I just know how long you've been thinking about it. She stepped closer, brushing sawdust from his shoulder. I've been thinking about a lot of things. His gaze flicked to hers. Like what? She hesitated, then nodded toward the bench. Did you ever finish the letter? The one for Theo?
Yes. You said you wanted to write him something.
For when he's older. He exhaled through his nose, resting his hand on the tabletop. I tried. I kept rewriting the ending. Why? Because every time I sat down, I realized I was writing from a place I don't live in anymore. I kept thinking like I was still scared, still waiting for something to fall apart. He looked up at her. But nothing's falling apart, Celine. Not this time. She reached out and took his hand. Then maybe it's not a letter he needs. Maybe it's just you. Every day. He pulled her hand to his chest. That's all I've ever wanted to be. Just. Here. With both of you. You are. They stood in silence as the wind carried the sound of Theo's laughter from behind the trees. She rested her head against his shoulder, and for the first time since they'd moved in, Xander didn't feel like a guest in someone else's life. Later that week, Celine surprised him with an invitation. Come with me to Geneva, she said over breakfast. There's a logistics summit. I'm keynoting. He looked up from his plate. You want me there for moral support? I want you there because I don't like the idea of traveling halfway across the world without you. What about Theo? I already asked Zoe. She's happy to stay with him for the weekend. He sipped his coffee slowly. You don't think it's too soon?
4.
Traveling together like that. We've been living together almost half a year. I think we're past too soon. Besides, she added, you've never seen Switzerland in the spring. 4 days later, they stood on the balcony of their hotel suite, a view of Lake Geneva stretching before them. The water shimmered in the morning light, and snow still clung to the distant Alps like a postcard come to life. This doesn't feel real, Xander said. It is, she replied, adjusting the collar of her blazer. Every second of it. He watched her slip into heels and check her reflection. You're going to destroy that room. I'm going to challenge a few assumptions. Same thing. She gave him a look. You're staying for the speech, right? He nodded. I'll be in the back, pretending not to be completely intimidated. You built a business from the ground up. You raised a child alone. And you taught me how to breathe again. You intimidate me. He reached for her waist, pulling her closer. You're still the most powerful person I've ever met. Power, she said softly, means nothing if you have no one to share it with. She left for the summit, and Xander stayed behind for a few hours, walking the lakefront and watching boats drift silently across the water. He thought about the version of himself who had once lived paycheck to paycheck, who had measured success by whether the electric bill could be paid on time. That man still existed inside him, but this version had something more. Not just stability, but direction. That evening, after her speech, Celine returned to the suite, quiet and unreadable. "How did it go?" he asked. She slipped off her heels and walked to the window before answering. "They asked me what changed. Why I'd suddenly started investing in small businesses. Why I restructured leadership. Why I shifted focus away from growth and toward sustainability." He waited. "I told them the truth," she said. "That I met someone who reminded me of what it means to build something that lasts." She turned to him. They didn't clap. He frowned. "Really?" "They stood," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "The whole room." He crossed the floor in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms. "You did that," she whispered. "You changed me." He pressed his forehead to hers. "I just showed you who you already were." When they returned home, Theo ran to greet them, waving a handmade welcome sign and dragging Celine down to the living room to show her the Lego space station he'd built. Xander watched them from the doorway, something solid and unshakable settling in his chest. 2 weeks later, Celine found him in the shop, bent over a new work order. "I have a question," she said, holding something behind her back. He didn't look up. "If it's about the invoice for the Wilkerson's water heater, I promise I didn't undercharge." "It's not." He finally glanced up. "Okay. Shoot." She stepped forward and placed a small velvet box on the counter. He stared at it. "What is that?" "Open it." Slowly, he lifted the lid. Inside was a brushed platinum ring, simple and elegant. He looked at her, stunned. "Celine, you once said you were afraid of landing somewhere you didn't belong. But you do. You belong with me. With us. And I don't want to wait for some perfect moment that will never come." His mouth opened, but no words came. "I want to marry you, Xander." He blinked. "You're proposing to me?" "Yes." "In the shop." "Where else?" she said, eyes gleaming. "You built it yourself." He swallowed hard. "You don't need a ring?" "I already have everything I need." He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I was going to give you this tonight." She took it, unfolded it. "Read it." It was a letter, not to Theo, but to her. A promise, a future, a vow, written in ink smudged with fingerprints and hope. By the time she looked up, he was holding the ring. "Let me do the asking this time," he said, voice low. "Marry me, Celine Marchand. Not because it's perfect, but because it's real." She didn't hesitate. "Yes." They married in a small ceremony in the backyard, surrounded by family and friends, and an overexcited Theo who insisted on being ring bearer and best man. There were no camera crews, no headlines, just laughter, music, and the kind of love that didn't need to be shouted to be heard. As they danced under the string lights, Xander pulled her close. "Do you ever think," he said, "about what would have happened if we hadn't gotten stuck in that elevator?" She smiled. "We would have found another way to meet. Eventually." "You sound sure." "I am," she said. "Some people are meant to find each other. No matter what." And in that moment with her in his arms, Theo laughing in the distance, and the stars blinking quietly above them, Xander finally believed it. He wasn't falling anymore. He had landed. Exactly where he was always meant to be. The scent of warm cinnamon drifted through the open windows of the lake cottage their first weekend away since the wedding. Theo was outside skipping stones along the shore, his laughter echoing across the still water. Inside, Xander stood barefoot at the kitchen island, stirring batter in a deep ceramic bowl while Celine leaned against the counter, sipping coffee from a chipped mug she'd insisted on keeping because Theo had painted it for Father's Day. "You're not measuring," she said, eyeing the mixing process with amused skepticism. "Instinct," he replied. "Men like me don't need teaspoons. We've got legacy." She tilted her head. "Legacy, huh?" He flicked flour at her, grinning when she gasped and ducked behind her mug. "I'll have you know," he said, "these pancakes were once described as magically edible by a very discerning 5-year-old food critic." "High praise," she noted. He poured the batter onto the griddle, the sizzle filling the quiet of the morning. Outside, the sound of distant birdsong mingled with Theo's voice, narrating some elaborate imaginary scene involving a time-traveling raptor and a talking canoe. Celine smiled faintly as she listened. "He's different here," she said. "Lighter." Xander flipped a pancake and nodded. "It's the trees. They whisper secrets." She stepped closer, looping her arms around his waist from behind. "You're different too." "How so?" "You're not constantly looking over your shoulder, waiting for the other shoe to drop." He glanced over his shoulder at her. "That's because I finally realized the shoe isn't coming. And even if it does, I've got someone who'll help me stitch it back together." "That's not how shoes work." "Metaphors aren't my strong suit," he admitted. "But love is." He turned and kissed her, slow and deep, until the pancakes nearly burned. After breakfast, they wandered down to the dock where Theo had lined up a row of hand-painted rocks. He explained each one with theatrical flair: a volcano rock, a moon rock, a very rare cookie rock that looked suspiciously like a regular pebble. Celine crouched beside him. "You know what we should do?"
Tausche Eislitu.
"What?" "Build a rock museum. Right here, next to the treehouse." Xander raised an eyebrow. "We don't have a treehouse." Celine looked at him steadily. "We will." Theo clapped and ran off to gather more rocks. Xander watched him disappear into the woods, then turned to her. "You're serious?" "I've already spoken to a builder." "Of course you have." She brushed her fingers against his. "Our lives aren't small anymore, Xander. They're allowed to stretch." That night, they lit a fire in the outdoor pit and wrapped themselves in blankets while Theo fell asleep in a hammock nearby, his arms curled around a stuffed T-Rex. "I've been thinking about something," Celine said, tracing the edge of her wine glass. "Should I be worried?" "Maybe." He shifted to face her. "Lay it on me." "I want to start a foundation," she said. "A small one, at first. Focused on helping single parents start businesses. Grants, mentorship, maybe even childcare stipends." He blinked. "You want to do this because of me?" "I want to do this because of what I saw in you. And because I know there are thousands more just like you who need someone to believe in them before the world does." Xander was quiet for a long moment. "Can I be part of it?" "I was hoping you'd say that." That conversation turned into late nights at the dining room table, drafting mission statements and vetting potential board members. Celine handled the legal groundwork, while Xander met with community organizers and former clients who'd pulled themselves up from impossible places. The foundation launched 3 months later, quietly but purposefully, with its first 5 recipients receiving seed funding and support. Theo, unaware of the scope of it all, declared himself official dinosaur mascot of the initiative and insisted on attending the first check presentation in a cardboard costume that shed green glitter everywhere. Celine didn't correct him. She just had the team print a certificate with his name on it. Summer melted into fall, and life found a new rhythm. Xander's shop expanded into a neighboring space, employing 3 local apprentices. Celine split her time between her company and the foundation, gracefully juggling both while never missing a single school performance or weekend breakfast. One crisp October afternoon, as golden leaves drifted onto the sidewalk, Xander stood at the shop counter organizing receipts when a man walked in. Not a customer. A face from the past. Tall, lean, with a stiff posture and wary eyes, Theo's maternal grandfather. Xander froze. "What are you doing here?" The man looked uncomfortable, holding his hat in his hands. "I read about the foundation. Saw your name. I thought maybe I should see him." Xander's jaw clenched. "You never came when she left. You never called." "I know," the man said. "I didn't handle things right." "That's an understatement." He hesitated. "I'm not asking for anything. I just thought maybe I could meet him. Just once." Xander exhaled slowly. "He doesn't know about her." "Not really. I didn't want him growing up with that kind of pain." "I understand. I don't know if I want to open that door." The man nodded. "I'll go." As he turned, Xander felt a flicker of something he hadn't expected: compassion. "Wait." The man stopped. "I'll talk to Celine. And to Theo. But this has to be on his terms." "Of course." That night, he told Celine everything. She didn't interrupt. When he finished, she took his hand. "If it were me," she said, "I'd want the choice." The next day, they sat with Theo and explained carefully, gently, that someone from his mom's side had asked to meet him. Theo asked if he could think about it. They said yes. A week later, Theo decided he wanted to meet the man. They arranged it in a park, in public, with no expectations. The meeting was quiet, tentative, but not painful. Theo asked questions. The man answered truthfully. There were no promises. Just a single, cautious connection. Later, as they walked home, Theo looked up at Xander. "He seems sad." "He probably is." Theo nodded, thoughtful. "But I'm not." Xander swallowed hard. "I'm glad." That evening, Celine opened a bottle of wine and lit candles on the back patio. They sat beneath a blanket, the air cool and smelling faintly of pine. "When I met you," she said, "I didn't think it would ever be this." "Neither did I." "You've changed so much." "So have you." She leaned into him. "Do you ever miss the life you had before?" He shook his head. "It brought me to you. That's all I need to know." She kissed him, slow and certain, and the world fell quiet around them. Years passed. The treehouse rose beside the Rock Museum, painted in swirling blues and greens. The shop grew into a citywide brand, known for its honesty and heart. The foundation expanded to 5 cities, with dozens of success stories etched into its legacy. Theo grew taller, louder, kinder. He read books about stars and built machines from scrap metal. He called Xander Dad without hesitation, and Celine Mom with a quiet certainty that never failed to make her eyes shine. One summer evening, as fireflies blinked across the lawn of their lake cottage, they gathered around a long wooden table. Friends, family, laughter echoing through the trees. Xander raised a glass. "To second chances," he said, "and to the people who believe in them." Celine clinked her glass against his. "To the life we built together." And as the sun dipped below the treetops, they held each other close. No fear.
No hesitation.
Just love.
Real.
Earned. Forever.